So one of the things that has dropped Labour's popularity, especially amongst over 65s, but more broadly across the population, is the fact that they have cut the winter fuel payment for those who aren't on pension credit, because there was this black hole in the nation's finances, which we've discussed on stream if you want to look into what's true and what's not about what Rachel Reeves was saying there. But regardless, they've decided to take money away from pensioners rather than trying to, massively increase taxes on the ultra wealthy that they could do to ensure that we didn't take money away from pensioners that need it. Anyway, James O'Brien, Starmer sycophant extraordinaire, somebody who had very little criticism for Keir Starmer in the run-up to the election, somebody who thought, no, he couldn't possibly be doing things against the interests of regular people in this country because he's the red team, and the red team are the good people. He's not a morally corrupt serial liar. How dare you say such a thing? Maybe he did indeed lie about protecting pensioners and keeping the winter fuel payment for everybody, which they did promise in the run-up to the election, but you think Starmer will just lie like this? Anyway, he did a whole segment about this being Labour's first big mistake. Of course, that's notwithstanding all the other mistakes they've made, but let's see how much humble pie James is going to eat over to this pretty high-profile Labour U-turn. Let's have a look.
10 million is a very big number. It really is, and possibly bigger than you realised, the number of pensioners who are set to lose their winter fuel payment. I am generally in favour of universal benefits. Sadiq Khan explains it well when he justifies his decision to roll out free school meals to every primary school child in London. There's something nice about universal benefits. The idea that people who don't need something get something is easily turned into a negative, but it's actually a positive. It's a weird endorsement of equality, social equality, isn't it?
I mean, this is true, but it's not a good argument. It's true, but it's not a good argument. The reason why universal benefits are good is because you do not have to spend money administering the means test. It is more efficient. And if you believe that rich people might be getting something they're not entitled to, you can just increase taxes on rich people. It's not a difficult concept to be able to understand. There's an excellent article that we read on stream before by Matt Brunig about how universal benefits are cheaper than means tested benefits as long as you have a tax policy that counteracts it. And that's well worth reading. But talking about it being nice, it's not a way you're going to win anybody over. You need to win people over with facts rather than feelings.
And yet, if money is tight, then giving money from that pot to people who really don't need it becomes ever more questionable and arguably ever more wrong. So I think that I subscribe. If I have an opinion on this, it would be that it's probably right to means test the winter fuel payment.
See, because he has no actual theoretical or economic underpinning for the opinion that he came to in the first place, just when it is nice, isn't it? Rather than going, well, actually, how much do we have to spend on administering this means test? Do we really save that money in totality? Could we introduce a tax that means we don't have to take away the means test, which would be more efficient because you're just changing the tax policy, which requires no administration? So we could do that, but we're not doing that. But because he's not even interrogated that possibility and just thought, well, it's nice to do it universally, isn't it? He's then gone, well, we haven't got any money, so we can't give out the money, so we have to means test it, even though it's more inefficient.
But I think the government have got this wrong. But I am very susceptible to the argument that they shouldn't really have taken it away from anybody. When Rachel Reeves justifies the removal of pension credits, although it fell to Ed Miliband to do it this morning, the removal of help with your fuel bills for everybody not in receipt of a pension credit, because of the mess that they have inherited, the economic mess that they have inherited, there was a little bit of me that went, oh, really? Really? And I don't know. I mean, I'm going to look at the principles of this, the ethics of this, and also the reality of it. The question of whether we, who aren't affected by it, how we feel about the experiences, the situation of the people who are affected by it. But that's a little side.
What's frustrating as well is he says that because of the mess left by the previous government, one of the messes that we were left with was that they didn't do enough to spend enough money. They were too fiscally austere for 14 years, and that left people worse off. And because they failed in terms of loads of different amounts of government expenditure, we have to pick up the tab with increased welfare payments that are more expensive than if they, insulated all these houses that old people need to heat, if they had done more investment into clean energy to bring bills down. Like, they could have done these things, but they didn't. So the fact that we're therefore punishing people because of the failures of the government by taking away a thing that was given to them because of government failure, this is just doubling down on conservative failure rather than fixing it. That's the big problem that we've got here, that he's not interrogated either.
Side order, okay, let's park that now. How can we help pensioners who are entitled to it but don't realise get it? Okay, that's your starter for 10. But it is 9 minutes after 10. And the question I really want to ask, there's two questions really that I want to ask. The first is this the fairest way to do it? So the pension credit threshold right, is means testing. You qualify for the pension credit according to what your income is. And if your income is below a certain level, you get the pension credit. And therefore, if you get the pension credit, then you get the winter fuel payment as well. But that means that if you're a pound below the threshold to get the pension credit, you're a pound above, I beg your pardon, the threshold to get the pension credit, you're going to lose your 300 quid fuel payment as well. Now, every pensioner in the country has lost money, lost help with their fuel bills because, amazingly, under Liz Truss, everybody got help with their fuel bills because the prices rocketed so much that the government actually had to step in and provide a form of universal credit to everybody. Everybody got a bit of help with their energy bills. So pensioners have already lost that. 10 million pensioners are now losing the £300 a year as well. 880,000 pensioners who should be getting the £300 and the pension credit are currently not lined up to receive that. And yet, the question of whether this is the fairest way to do it is one that I cannot answer alone. I actually don't know. How many times have I said to you that thresholds are brutal policy mechanisms? Whether it's the benefit under which you get child benefit, anything that's means tested is potentially very, very brutal. You can live over the road from someone who earns £5 less than you do, and as a consequence of that, they receive a benefit worth much more than £5.
And this is the problem with means testing, is that you create in-groups and out-groups, on top of the fact that there are people who fall through the cracks. There'll be people who are eligible for pension credit, who have not claimed pension credit because they didn't know they were eligible for it, who are expecting to get the winter fuel payment, who will now not get it because they're not claiming. And if you're trying to do this to be able to save money, and you therefore essentially tell a bunch of people who are eligible for pension credit to claim it when they're not, then you're not going to save the money in the first place. And when you have the in-group and the out-group, you create political resentment. You create political resentment between the haves and the have-nots if you have two people, as he says, as he correctly points out, who are in different circumstances only very slightly, and then one person is better off and the other person isn't. That resentment goes away under a universal scheme here. In the same way that you create the in-group and out-group for free school meals if you have two separate queues for which kids get what. And on top of that, you therefore have to pay for the administration of some people paying for meals when some people don't do. If you have it all free, suddenly all of the extra quote-unquote red tape of the payment system goes away.
But how else do you do it? I presume it would be too complicated to do it on a sliding scale. We still reel, or I do, from the discovery live on air of warm banks a couple of years ago. I still, of all the moments that I've spent with you in the morning and felt the metaphorical shovel smack me in the back of the head as I sit here in the studio, getting my head around the existence of and necessity of warm banks.
Not to mention the people too proud to claim welfare because that's how stigmatised the welfare system has been made. Also very true. People who will be expecting to get the winter fuel payment will now not be getting it, not because they failed to claim pension credit because they didn't know, but they have been propagandised into thinking that they would be a scrounger for claiming a welfare payment, even though the state pension is literally a welfare payment. It is incapacity benefit for people who are too old to work. It is not something that you pay into. It's not an entitlement, the state pension. It is part of the welfare state that could go at any point, right? If you get mad about the welfare state when people who are out of work or who are disabled claim it, but not when pensioners claim it, when they are both claiming it for the exact same reason, they are unable to work because they are incapable, either because they're too disabled or because they're too old or because the market hasn't provided enough jobs to be able to bring people in. That's what the unemployment level is. That's what the NAIRU is in a non-full employment model. The non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment is the lowest unemployment can get to in a capitalist neoliberal economy. People therefore are unemployed of no reason of their own just because the market has designated it as such. These people are all getting payments from the state for the same reason, and that is because they are unable to work, whether because the market has failed or because they are physically unable to. That's what the state pension is. It's good that we have it. It's excellent that we have the state pension. I am glad that we do it. We should be paying old people to be able to live because they're unable to work because they're too old. That's a great thing that we do. But treating it like an entitlement that you pay into rather than the welfare payment that you get creates, again, an us and them paradigm where it's seen as the good welfare payment rather than the bad welfare payment, again, which creates a dichotomy that shouldn't really exist. And which is why people might not claim pension credit because they feel too proud to do so. When it comes to James here with his last comment, I mean, at least he's recognised that learning about warm banks makes him feel bad about this country. But, you know, most people who didn't live in the London LBC private school bubble that James clearly lives in. We all knew about this stuff beforehand because we lived it. You can't live in Salford like I did, or live in Nottingham like I now do, or live in any of the left behind areas in this country and not know about food banks and warm banks because you know people who use them. Do you think James knows people who use them? No, he had to find out through the press, which is fine if you don't know and then you have an empathetic reaction. James has this, which also right-wingers do not have, and that's a good thing, but it shows you how out of touch he has to be from where he hears it from and how late that he hears it. This is the James O'Brien problem. Not that he's wrong, he's just right 5 years too late.
One of the maddest moments I think I've ever spent in this studio. I say, they what? They do what? And I should have seen it coming because I spoke to people during the sort of worst times of the cost of living crisis who were only turning on the radiator for an hour a day or sitting in a room under blankets watching television in balaclava helmets. I spoke to people who were physically cold all the time. You remember, I know you do, and you possibly think I refer to it too often, but I have no control over what lands heaviest in my mind. I remember the wife of the teacher in Great Yarmouth who had outdoor coats for her children because they were so cold that normally they wore coats inside, and when they went outside they needed an extra layer, so they'd have an outdoor coat to go over the top of the indoor coat. Cold in the United Kingdom in the 21st century, the 5th or...
Yes. That's what it was like. That's what George Osborne did to the country. George Osborne, the true bad man, not the floppy hair Brexit bad man, not Boris Johnson. George Osborne, the person who destroyed this country. That's the guy who destroyed the country. The state pension is in theory paid for by our national insurance contributions. I think that's not true, unfortunately. It's a well-spread myth that national insurance contributions pay for your state pension. They qualify you for it. They're a qualifying metric. The showing that you have a certain amount of national insurance contributions is how the government allows you to qualify for the state pension. But they don't pay into the state pension, they don't pay into a pot. You're paying in to then get paid back out. Your national insurance contributions, just like mine do now, pay for current pensioners. Pensioners get paid out of current taxable receipts.
The 6th largest economy in the world, and people were too cold. They were too poor to heat their homes. Working people too poor to heat their homes. In the case of pensioners, perhaps, people who have worked all their lives, ending up too poor to heat their homes. It's not right. It's not right. But is the Labour policy fair? Is it the only way, the best way, the fairest way to do it? 0345 6060973. I get your calls on a bit earlier, actually. We'll talk to Martin after 11, and I want your calls to come on now, all right? So how is it going to affect you? Is it, for the rest of us, if you like, fair? We have to acknowledge some people are going to be right on the line, right on the threshold. That is the nature of a policy like this one, and tough, but that's the way it is. I don't know. I honestly don't know. You may well know more about this than I do. And here's the big question. So we were talking this morning about Labour losing members and Keir Starmer's approval ratings dropping a bit. And one of my colleagues said to me, do you think they'll be bothered by that? And I said, I don't think they're going to be bothered by anything in this field until about 2027, 2028. They've got a whopping great majority. It can barely be nibbled at by election results. There's highly, highly, highly unlikely prospects of anyone challenging Keir Starmer's leadership anytime soon. The right-wing media is currently struggling hugely to make anything land on them.
So this was the guy who, in the run-up to the election, said that he shouldn't be scared of a Labour supermajority because what would they do with that power? And now they're in government, taking money away from cold, elderly people, which he's at least somewhat having some skepticism over, which is at least good, again, that he's getting there late in the day. But then he's also saying, well, there's no challenge to Keir Starmer's leadership. They're not going to have to care about this because their majority is so large. By-elections will do nothing to their gigantic majority that they have, and the right wing are desperate to find things to attack them, and they can't find any attacks that will stick. And I'm like, this is the problem. This was the problem with the supermajority that you said you didn't have a problem with because Keir Starmer wasn't a morally corrupt serial liar that he clearly was. And now you're seeing the problem. You're finding a clear problem in Labour Party's political platform, which you refuse to scrutinise. You refuse to scrutinise this political platform for the weeks and months in the run-up to the election, rather than being a unbiased political commentator, finding the good and the bad in each party platform. You were a clear supporter of Keir Starmer's Labour Party, and you didn't critically analyse what they were proposing for the country, and then said, well, it's fine if they get a large supermajority. I don't really mind. And now you're here, you finally realise that they're doing bad things when they're in government. It's not just this, but at least now he's cottoned onto something that is bad in terms of the winter fuel payment cut. And now he's going, oh, well, they're not going to have to do anything about this. They can do whatever they want because they've got a large supermajority. This was always the problem, James. This was literally going to be the problem. And you didn't listen to everybody to the left of Gerhard Schröder for all of these months up to the election when we told you this was going to happen. Again, Captain Hindsight strikes again. King of the sensibles.
Pay rises for public sector workers. They desperately try to sort of portray as unions holding the government to ransom. But, you know, I'm all for pay rises for public sector workers. I'm all for pay rises for train drivers. The people who are at the forefront of austerity are the people who are going to need the most help now, or not even help. They're just a fair wage for a fair day's work. So on it goes. But the one thing that I think if I was Keir Starmer, I'd be keeping a very close eye on is this, the winter fuel payment, the removal of financial support for old age pensioners. You can use the language, can't you? And I want your final answer to the question. The final question that I want you to answer today is how politically pungent do you think this policy is? So everyone can get involved. There's people directly affected by the change. There are people with informed opinions about the fairness of the change, the fundamental fairness stroke necessity of the change. And finally, the question of political pungency. How politically significant do you think this will be? Because when you pick the pocket of 10 million pensioners, you are taking an enormous political risk. And I want to know whether you think that this marks, because I am beginning to, does this mark the first big misstep of Keir Starmer's Labour government?
That online there.
I mean, he did take away a bunch of medication for trans kids. Also pretty bad. They also essentially said that they're not going to halt arms sales to Israel yet, even though people are resigning from the office over the fact that we might be breaking international law. Plenty of missteps already, just saying. Things that we told you were going to happen as well.
The other day, because my mum doesn't have an internet access either, James,
No.
so I did it online and I went on and I tried to get her pension credit. Everything I've tried to apply for her, she is literally just over the threshold.
Like pennies over the threshold.
Pennies over the threshold, but she's out, she's already can't afford to fund herself, and because, well, you know yourself, food, everything's went up.
Yeah.
So even shopping for her now is nearly double
It's
what
not
it
fair,
was.
is
But
it?
her funds haven't, and all our wee neighbours and folk round about it, and lots of people where I live as well. They pay their rent or they pay their mortgage or whatever, and that's all they've got. They don't have savings. They don't have any other income.
No,
My mum
you've
really
nailed it.
feels-
You've absolutely crystallised the constituency that's going to be hit hardest by this. And
they're going to die, and do you know the thing is, they're going to be taken into the NHS ill, hypothermia, lack of nutrition, and that's just going to add to the burden that's already the way
That's
the
a great
country
point.
is. So
What's that? Neoliberal, austere state politics means that we have to spend more money down the line on all of the negative externalities that get caused by austere neoliberal state politics. Who would have thought it? After all of these years of having to pay down the failures of the Conservative government to properly invest in the public sector, which has led to all of this extra money being having to spend on the failures of their lack of investment in the public sector in terms of housing benefit or spending on temporary accommodation or adult social care, suddenly Labour in power, and we're actually recognising this. We're actually recognising you take away this money now and we have to spend more money later. Again, really short-sighted, but the problem is Rachel Reeves is not fundamentally promising anything qualitatively different to what we just got out of office. The big change poster it was missing some key words, which were nothing will fundamentally change.
Great point.
crazy scheme.
It puts a slightly different complexion on the question of whether or not this is the only, I mean, it's going to hurt some people, but the question of whether or not this is the only way to do it, this is, if you accept the necessity of saving money, then this is the only way to do it, is a question I feel uncomfortable asking now, having heard about Isabel's plight. Final question for you, Leslie, is how politically pungent do you think it is? Because if I were to be really cynical, I can't really see this pushing traditional Labour supporters into the arms of the Tory party. I can see it pushing them into apathy or not bothering to vote or feeling very let down by the Labour Party. But this, in terms of political impact, how big a mistake do you think Keir Starmer is making?
Well, what I'll say to you is, I'll say it as quickly as I possibly can. My dad was a strong Labour man. I was brought up in a Labour, and life was good when I was growing up. I'm 56, and life was good when the Labour were in the last time, and everything. The country ran really well. So. Actually, up in Scotland, I've been an SNP voter on and off, but this time I went back to Labour because that's where my roots are. I remember growing up, life was good with Labour, and as I say, I was brought up that way. And you know, when Labour get back in, I was so overjoyed. I thought maybe they'll turn the country around. They're going to have one hell of a mess to clean up because nobody's really been in charge of anything for 14 years properly. And I thought maybe they'll do it and they'll do it right. And I still get faith that they can turn it round, James, but this is a bad, bad move. This is not a good move, and I don't know what they're thinking about doing this, because it'll turn an awful lot of people, not against them, but be very, very wary of them. And they certainly won't turn them to the Tories, because you need to have a foolish.
That's why I worry about the cynicism behind some of the.
And it's incredible. Literally, somebody who flipped between the SNP and Labour and going, "Oh well, I'll go back to Labour so they can fix the problems of the Conservative Party," and then they immediately throw it back in these people's faces. Every single person, remember, who switched from the SNP to Labour in Scotland, like this, you got what you wanted. Although, to be fair, unfortunately, they have been hoodwinked just like loads of other people have been during this election campaign. In the Anna Sawa, during the Scottish election debate, said incredibly clearly, "Read my lips, no austerity under Labour." And what will be being promised? More austerity, more cuts, more removal of welfare state payments. Rachel Reeves famously in 2014 said that she wanted to be tougher than the Tories on the welfare state. I mean, you kind of have to say that you got what you wanted. I'm sorry that if you swap from SNP to Labour, like if you swapped from the SNP to Labour, like this is what you wanted. I'm sorry. You may have been hoodwinked, but these people haven't been shy about telling you who they really are, and now they're showing you who they really are. I feel sorry for this lady. I feel sorry for her mum. I really do, because they're now going to be at the sharp end of terrible Labour policy. But we've been screaming it from the rooftops. Stephen Flynn talked about all of these cuts and the potential for cuts coming from a potential Labour government throughout the election debates, both in Scotland and broadly throughout the United Kingdom in these election debates, which loads of people watch. There was plenty of warning signs about the potential for Labour austerity from us here on the left and the SNP and the centre left as well. And these people unfortunately didn't listen, and they got the government that they wanted, and they got the policy that they asked for. My sympathy can only go so far. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.